be looking at our own DNA. So we know that cells make up our entire bodies, and within these cells, there's something called a nucleus. And this nucleus is the thing that houses our DNA. DNA is so important because it helps us grow and develop. It makes us who we are. Because DNA is the code for all living things, it is super important, but since it has to fit inside every single cell, it is really, really small. Well, today we're going to do an experiment that helps us to see our own DNA. So to begin our experiment, we first need to make sure we have all of our materials. To start off, we're going to need a little over 2 cups of water. We're going to also make sure that we have a tablespoon ready to make all of our measurements. We're also going to need some salt, a spoon to mix things up. Then we're also going to need dishwasher liquid. It's important that this is dishwasher liquid and not just dish soap because they are different. Next up, we're going to need to make sure we have 100 milliliters of rubbing alcohol. And then lastly, we will need food coloring, but it's going to need to be some dark form of food coloring. Now, before we begin, we need to make sure that we are safe scientists. We need to remember safety first. Now we can start our experiment. So the very first thing we're going to do is we are going to use our water that we have, and we are going to pour it into the very first cup. Now that we have our water in our cup, we are going to add 1 tablespoon of salt into this first cup. Now that we see we have salt in the bottom, we need to stir it. Now that we have our salt water, we're going to pour about 2 milliliters or just a little bit into our second cup. Into a second cup, Lauren is going to gargle the salt water for 1 whole minute. For cup number 3. So we have our cup number 3, it should be completely empty, and we are going to add in 100 milliliters of this rubbing alcohol. And then we're also going to add in 3 drops of food coloring into cup number 3. While that's happening, we also need to go back to cup number 2 and add in 1 milliliter of dishwashing soap. Now that our cup number 2 has the dishwasher soap in it, and now that cup number 3 has the food coloring and the rubbing alcohol, we are going to pour the contents of cup number 3 very slowly into cup number 2. Now that all the contents are into cup number 2, we are going to wait 4 minutes. Small, but if we have a lot of cells, if they burst and that DNA can come out, it can then clump together together and we can actually see it. And that's exactly what happened in this experiment. It's important to remember that everyone's DNA is so unique and is so different, and that's what makes you special, and that's what makes you who you are. So if you're ever wondering where your DNA is, you can always do this experiment to find out. See you later, scientists.